They say a recipe is just instructions, until it's cooked by the right hands. And for me, it all began with the calloused hands of my grandfather Frank Romano. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, but could silence a room with the way he stirred his Sunday gravy. He and my grandma Maria came to America in 1952, with nothing but a satchel, a half-used Bible, and 3 jars of dried basil from the garden back home in Sicily. They arrived in Galveston, Texas, a sun-beaten coastal town, where salt clung to your skin, and time moved like molasses. It wasn't much, but to them, it was paradise. Frank started as a dock worker. Maria cleaned hotel rooms. But at night, in the back of a rented apartment above a shoe shop, they cooked. Not just for themselves, but for anyone who needed a warm meal. It wasn't charity, it was community. Then, in 1956, with their life savings and 2 second-hand ovens, they opened Romano's Table. Just 6 tables and one big promise: everyone eats with dignity. I wasn't born until decades later, but I grew up in that kitchen. I still remember the worn-out tile floor, the scratchy radio in the back playing Sinatra, and the dent in the copper pot where Grandpa would knock his wooden spoon every time the sauce was just right. But there's one night I'll never forget. I must have been 9 or 10. The place was packed, standing room only, and a homeless man walked in. He didn't smell good. His shoes were duct-taped. He mumbled something about being hungry, then started to walk back out. I remember watching from behind the counter, wondering if Grandpa would chase him away. Instead, he walked up, smiled, and said, "You like lasagna or gnocchi?" The man stared, silent. Grandpa led him to a corner table and poured him a glass of water like he was a paying customer. Then he told me, "Bring out the special plate, the one we'd save for the bishop." I didn't get it at the time, but I do now. See, to my grandfather, food wasn't just about flavor, it was about memory, identity, grace. Every plate carried a story, and every person who walked through our doors was worth serving, no matter what they wore or where they'd. Then he used to say, "You feed the stomach, you feed a moment. But when you feed the soul, they'll remember you forever." Over the decades, Romano's Table grew. My father, Joseph, took over in the 80s and added more dishes, modern touches, even wine pairings. He ran it with the same hands-on care, always reminding me, "You're not a businessman, you're a host. Never forget that." And I didn't. When he passed the keys to me 5 years ago, I didn't take it lightly. It wasn't just a building or a business. It was a promise passed down through generations. I rebuilt the walls, updated the kitchen, rebranded the logo, but I kept the copper pot and the bishop's plate, dents and all. Because some legacies don't sit in history books, they sit quietly on a table, waiting to be served. And that's where our real story begins. On a cold December night, when a woman in red heels walked through my door, claiming she knew the owner, she had no idea I was the one serving her. Would you like me to continue with the next section? 2. A quiet owner in a loud world. Sometimes, when people look at me, they don't see the owner. They see a guy in rolled-up sleeves, clearing tables, refilling water glasses, sweeping up crumbs. They see an apron, not a title. And honestly, I prefer it that way. Most nights, folks call me Tom. Just Tom, not Mr. Romano, not Sir, and definitely not the guy who signs the checks. I'm not the type to stand at the bar, sipping scotch while barking orders to the kitchen. I'd rather be in the kitchen, folding napkins, plating pasta, checking to see if the old couple in the corner wants decaf or regular. Because I've learned something over the years. The louder the world gets, the more powerful quiet presence becomes. See, I never wanted to be a boss. I wanted to be a steward, a caretaker. This restaurant isn't just my business. It's my father's legacy and my grandfather's heartbeat. So I show up early, before the city wakes, and I stay late, long after the last glass is washed. I don't just manage. I serve. You might see a young waiter spill soup and think nothing of it. But I see my younger self, 15 years old, terrified, holding back tears while Grandpa calmly handed me a towel and said, "Try again, kid. We don't serve perfect food. We serve with heart." I carry that with me every day. Our regulars know me, not for my title, but for remembering their stories. I know Bill likes his trout pan-seared, but no lemon. That Irene wants 2 ice cubes, not 3. That Mr. Jacobs, now in his 90s, once proposed to his wife in booth 7 right under the old chandelier we never replaced, no matter how many remodels we've done. And when we host high-profile night celebrity fundraisers, politicians, critics' eyes still don't dress like a CEO. I wear a clean jacket, yes, but I stay on the floor. I shake hands. I bust dishes. I make sure the sauce is hot, the music is low, and the laughter is high. I remember one night, a local congressman pulled me aside and said, "You know, Tom, I had no idea you were the owner. Thought you were just the friendliest waiter I've ever met." I smiled and said, "That's the highest compliment you could give me. Because the truth is, I don't need recognition. I don't need a plaque on the wall or my name etched in gold. I just need to know that when someone walks through those doors, after a long day, or a hard week, or even just looking for a piece of comfort, they'll find it here. Not just in the food, but in the feeling. That quiet, familiar warmth that says, 'You're welcome here.' That's what I've built. Not a restaurant, a refuge. But I've also learned something else. When you stay quiet, some people mistake you for weak. They look at your kindness and call it softness. They see humility and confuse it with submission. They think just because you don't shout, you can't stand your ground, and sometimes they try to take advantage of that silence. That's what happened on the night she arrived. Red heels, designer coat, and a voice that didn't ask it demanded. She didn't recognize me, and that was her first mistake. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that I was raised in this place. That the chairs she scoffed at were carved by my grandfather's hands. That the recipes she'd soon critique were born from 3 generations of labor, love, and late nights. And that the man she tried to intimidate was not just another waiter, but the quiet owner of a very loud legacy. And so, when she walked in that night, announcing she was a close friend of the owner, I simply smiled. I played along, because sometimes, the best way to teach someone humility is to let them walk straight into it. It was one of those nights that felt heavier than usual. The sky outside had turned that deep winter blue, the kind that creeps in early and makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Inside the restaurant, the lights glowed soft and amber, jazz hummed from the speakers, and the air carried the scent of rosemary, garlic, and something that always reminded people of home even, if it wasn't theirs. We were at capacity. Every table filled. Every server moving like clockwork. I was helping clear a corner booth when I saw her. No, heard her before I ever laid eyes on her. The front doors flew open with the kind of force that made the host glance up, startled. Then came the echo of heels, sharp, deliberate, unapologetic, against the oak floors like a judge's gavel announcing a sentence. She wore a red dot, not the kind of red you wear because it flatters your complexion. The kind of red you wear because you want to be seen, and more importantly, remembered. Her coat was designer. Her lips were painted to match, and her hair was curled in the way that said someone else probably did it. Behind her trailed 5 younger women laughing too loudly, dressed like they were walking into a Manhattan rooftop bar. Not a family-run Italian restaurant, tucked away in a sleepy Kentucky town. I watched her scan the room like she owned it, chin lifted, eyes half-lidded, with expectation, and then, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she turned to the others and said, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, "This is it, girls. Tony always keeps a table for me." Tony, I almost laughed out loud. She didn't know me, she didn't know my name. But she had picked one that sounded Italian, enough to convince her friends she had connections. And judging by the way they were all nodding, wide-eyed and giggling, it worked. I stepped toward them, napkin over my arm, doing my best impression of the Invisible Man. "Good evening," I said calmly. "Welcome to Romano's. Do you have a reservation?" She gave me that look, half pity, half annoyance, as if I'd just asked the Queen for ID. "We don't need one," she said breezily. "Tony knows I always come by this time of year. He told me personally he keeps a VIP table open just for me." There was a silence, brief, but electric, like the restaurant itself paused to listen. My staff at the host stand shifted nervously. One of them, a new girl named Mia, looked to me for help. I held my gaze on the woman, smiled politely, and nodded, as if I had just remembered some long-lost cousin I'd forgotten existed. "Oh, I see," I said. "You must be Madison." "Close," she said, laughing. "Melissa. But I'm sure Tony talks about me all the time." I nodded again, playing along. Her voice was sugar-coated arrogance, every syllable steeped in performance. And her entourage, they were eating it up, filming videos, posing beside the marble archway like it was the entrance to a 5-star hotel. She leaned in and lowered her voice. "I assume the VIP table is still available." I paused, gave the room a subtle glance, then motioned toward the velvet section that overlooked the fireplace. "We might be able to work something out, but I'll need an ID and a credit card to hold the tab." Standard protocol, you know. Especially for special guests. Without hesitation, she handed me a platinum card and a driver's license, like she'd done this routine 100 times before. But her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker of nerves, a shadow of something fragile beneath the performance. Still, she squared her shoulders and said to her girls, "Tonight's on me." As I walked back to process her details, I glanced down at her card. Melissa Hampton. No Tony in her contacts. No connection to this place. Just a woman in a red coat, with a taste for power, and an audience that applauded her every lie. And yet, I didn't feel angry, I felt curious. Because when people walk into this restaurant, they bring more than hunger. They bring their stories, their pasts, their masks. Some wear them loosely. Others have forgotten where the real face ends and the costume begins. Melissa wasn't the first to bluff her way into a seat, but something about her, about the way she tossed around names like currency, about the way she looked at people as if they owed her something, told me this night was going to unravel differently. This wasn't about dinner. This was about pride, and that meant ... Dessert was going to be served cold. I've always believed that a lie is like a spark on dry grass, small, careless, often harmless at first. But if the wind is just right, and the timing just wrong, it can burn down a forest. And that night, Melissa Hampton struck her match. After I seated them at our Velvetrope VIP section, the one usually reserved for anniversaries, visiting chefs, or the occasional country music legend, they made themselves right at home. Coats draped over antique chairs, laughter bouncing off the stone fireplace, phones out to film every pour of wine and every clink of a glass, like they were starring in their own reality show. I served them personally. It's something I do with high-profile guests, and in this case, I wanted to stay close. Not to control, but to observe. The first 3 rounds of cocktails. On the house, it's a tradition we reserve for special events. And tonight, well, let's just say the event was already unfolding. Melissa ordered top-shelf everything. Rare wines, imported oysters, truffle risotto, things she clearly didn't even recognize when they arrived. She had to ask what burrata was, but she didn't skip a beat when the drinks kept coming, round after round, every toast louder, every comment bolder. That's when it happened. I was setting down their third appetizer, grilled peaches with prosciutto and balsamic glaze, when one of the younger girls leaned over, eyes glassy from the wine, and asked me, "Can I ask you something? Just, like ... honestly." I smiled. "Sure." She tilted her head and said, "Don't you ever feel like your life is kind of, I dunno, sad? Like, no offense, but you're what, in your 30s? Still waiting tables?" It hit harder than I expected. Not because it was rude though, it was, but because of the casual way she said it. Like it was just common sense. Like the only thing she saw in me was a man who hadn't made it, who hadn't become anything. I stood there for a beat longer than I should have, holding the empty tray against my chest like a shield. My chest tightened, but not from shame. From clarity. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a woman bluffing her way into a fancy dinner. It was about something deeper, something rotten. It was about entitlement. It was about a mindset that said, if you serve me, you must be beneath me. And I wasn't angry for myself. I was angry for my grandfather, who scrubbed floors in a shipyard before opening this place. For my father, who wore grease burns like badges of honor. For every single person who's ever worked an honest job and been looked down on because of it. Melissa and her friends weren't just enjoying a free ride, they were building it on someone else's back. Still, I didn't flinch. I didn't lecture. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled and said, "Can I bring you anything else?" She blinked, surprised. Maybe she expected me to get flustered, to apologize, but I turned on my heel and walked back to the kitchen, my jaw clenched, heart calm, mind made up. They thought they were the ones in control. But from that moment on, the game changed. I was no longer the quiet owner in the background. I was the man holding the matchbook. And this time, I was going to let it burn just enough to make them feel the heat. I've always believed that the best way to expose a lie is to let it breathe, so I didn't confront Melissa. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I played along like a dealer, watching a gambler bluff with empty hands, just waiting for the final card to fall. Back in the kitchen, I told my staff to treat table 7 like royalty. Not because they deserved it, but because sometimes the sweetest revenge comes wrapped in 5-star service. Our best linen went out. Silver cutlery polished to a mirror shine. I even brought out the hand-pressed menus we reserve for private events. No prices listed. Only poetic descriptions of the dishes, written in the kind of cursive that makes everything feel $10 more expensive. Melissa loved it. She leaned back in her chair like a queen on her throne, flicking her eyes over the menu, like she could taste the prestige. She asked questions she didn't really understand. Is the foie gras vegan? And her friends laughed as if ignorance was a charming accessory. The wine kept flowing. I sent a complimentary amuse-bouche, shaved fennel, citrus zest, a whisper of white balsamic. They didn't eat it. Just took photos. Every 15 minutes, they ordered another round. Top-shelf cocktails, signature drinks, each more complicated and expensive than the last. A lavender gin fizz, a smoked maple bourbon, sour, a round of gold leaf martinis we only make on New Year's Eve. They didn't ask about cost. They didn't ask about limits. They were drunk on performance each. Sip another step deeper into the fantasy. At one point, Melissa flagged me down. You're being so good to us, she slurred. Tony really trained you well. I nodded. He runs a tight ship. She laughed. Tell him Melissa says hi. He'll know. I smiled politely and walked away. But inside, something stirred. Not anger. Not even amusement. Just a kind of sadness. Because this was someone so tangled in her own illusion. She couldn't tell where the lie ended and she began. But I stayed focused. Each item they ordered went on the tab. Every cocktail logged. Every specialty plat imported caviar, bison, wild mushroom risotto counted and charged accordingly. I made sure to check in often, just to offer her more rope. Would you care for another bottle of the brew? I'd ask, knowing full well she had no idea what it was. Of course, she'd say, we're celebrating. Anything special? She waved her hand. Every night's special, when you're Melissa Hampton. They laughed again. Somewhere, in the background, I could hear Miles Davis playing on vinyl. Soft, steady, knowing, a trumpet that never had to shout to be heard. And all the while, I kept my steps even, my face kind, my voice calm. Because when you've spent your life serving people, when you've learned to read them like pages in a well-worn book, you know exactly when to turn the story. And the story was about to turn, because Melissa thought the world would always bend to her charm. She thought the lies she told made her more powerful, that pretending to know the owner gave her the keys to the kingdom. But what she didn't realize was that I was the owner, and she had just waltzed into my house, with muddy shoes and a fake smile, demanding to be crowned queen. So I let her play her game, and I played mine, because sometimes the most patient host is the one setting the stage for the final course. The night was winding down. The once loud laughter had settled into a sluggish hum, the kind that follows too many drinks, and not enough food. Melissa and her entourage had stopped filming their every bite. Their makeup had smudged, voices slurred, and all that polished confidence began to melt under the warmth of their own overindulgence. Appetizers half-eaten and main courses poked at. A $120 seafood platter left untouched, except for a single shrimp. Someone tried to peel with a butter knife. They weren't hungry. They were performing. But every show must end. And this one had reached its final scene. I walked over with the bill tucked neatly in a black leather folder. Nothing flashy. Just clean. Just final. Here you go, I said softly, placing it in front of Melissa. Blink it. Her eyes unfocused. What's this? Your check, I said, smiling gently. Take your time. She opened it. The silence was instant. Her pupils adjusted, like they'd just seen the sun. $4,198. She read aloud, the numbers falling out of her mouth like pebbles down a well. She laughed, at first, a quick, tight sound. This has to be a mistake, she said, looking up. We didn't order this much. I nodded sympathetically and held out my hand. Let me double-check it for you. I walked a few steps away, gave it a minute, then returned with the exact same bill. Same total, same breakdown. I apologize, I said, handing it back. It's been reviewed. She stared, suddenly very sober. No, this isn't right. We got free drinks. You said so. You did, I said. The first 3 rounds. They're marked complimentary. You'll see that noted clearly on the top. Her fingers trembled as she traced the receipt line by line. Her friends leaned in, whispering, recounting in pairs. Phones were out, calculators open. Quiet panic setting in like slow-moving smoke. Melissa slammed the folder shut. I know, Tony, she said again, voice raised now. This whole thing is ridiculous. I'm going to call him right now. She pulled out her phone with dramatic flair, opening her contacts. She scrolled, Found a name Tony Romano's owner and began typing furiously. But I knew exactly what she'd done. Somewhere between the Oyster Tower and her fourth martini, she'd changed the name of one of her contacts, probably deleted every prior message, and was now composing a fabricated conversation to prove her lie. She showed me the thread. A few texts. "Can I stop by tonight?" Followed by, "Of course, Mel. You know you're always welcome." I didn't even need to look hard. "That's not my number," I said gently. She blinked, defiant. "He has multiple phones. You probably don't even have all of them." I smiled, just slightly. "How about this?" I said. "Let's call him right now. If he confirms a discount, I'll cut your bill in half." Her mask cracked. Not all at once, just a little tremor in the corner of her mouth. The slightest shift in posture. Then she exploded. "This is outrageous," she shouted. Heads turned. The few remaining diners glanced over their shoulders. Staff froze. Melissa was no longer playing a part. She was unraveling. "I set the folder back down on the table, ma'am," I said calmly. "If you continue, I'll be forced to ask you to leave or call the police." Her voice dropped, desperate now. "I just didn't think it would be this much." The girls didn't even eat. The food was dry. The drinks were watered down. Her entourage sat silent. No more giggling. No more phones. Just 5 young women, watching their ringleader's crown slip. Then she tried one last time. "I'm a loyal customer," she said. "I've been coming here for years. I know the family. Your father, he loved me." And that's when I set it down. My voice quiet, steady. "My grandfather built this place with his bare hands," I said. "My father spent 40 years protecting it, and I've poured everything I am into keeping their promise alive. You don't know us. You've never been here. And you certainly didn't earn a seat at this table." She stared at me like the ground had given out beneath her, and for the first time all night, she had nothing to say now. I added gently, "I won't charge you for the reserved table, or the service, or even the cleanup. But I do need you to pay for what you ordered, or we'll have to involve law enforcement." She nodded slowly, eyes filling, reached into her purse with shaking hands. Her friends, the same ones who cheered her on just hours before, opened their wallets too, quietly passing her folded bills, like guilt was suddenly contagious. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just walked back to the kitchen, took a breath, and poured myself a glass of water. Because the truth, when served cold, doesn't need a side of revenge. It's plenty satisfying on its own. But the night wasn't done with Melissa Hampton. Not yet. The dining room had settled back into its gentle rhythm. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Dishes clinked in the distance. The scent of espresso drifted from the bar, like a closing lullaby. Most of the late diners had gone home, full and warm, unaware that just moments ago, a small storm had passed through the heart of our restaurant, and quietly imploded at table 7. Melissa was still there, gathering her things with stiff, trembling hands. Her eyes were red, her voice barely above a whisper now, as she thanked her friends with forced smiles and empty promises to Venmo them later. The performance was over. The lights had dimmed, but something about the way the night ended, it still felt unfinished. And then, like a forgotten note, played at the end of a long song. The door opened again. She stepped in slowly, an older woman in a wool coat, gray hair pinned into a soft bun, pearl earrings glinting under the chandelier. She looked around the restaurant as if searching for something familiar. And when her eyes landed on me, she smiled. "Evening, Tom," she said. I recognized her instantly, Mrs. Evelyn Porter, a retired schoolteacher, local historian, and the kind of woman who carried herself with grace so effortless, it felt inherited. She used to come in every Wednesday with her husband, until he passed a few years back. Now she dined alone, always, with a book in her purse and kindness in her voice. I nodded. "Welcome back, Mrs. Porter. Would you like your usual table by the fireplace?" She smiled, but didn't move. Her eyes had shifted across the room, toward the group of girls now quietly preparing to leave. Her brow furrowed, ever so slightly. And then she said it. "Oh, is that Melissa Hampton?" Melissa froze. The girls looked up. Mrs. Porter took a few careful steps forward, studying her the way a teacher might study a misbehaving student she hadn't seen in decades. "I thought I recognized you," she continued, voice calm but clear. "You were in my English class. Senior year. You sat in the back near the window." Melissa managed a thin smile. "Yes, that was me." Mrs. Porter tilted her head, memories filtering through her eyes like dust through sunlight. "No," she said gently. "I remember you as the girl who cried when we read Of Mice and Men. You said it was the first time a book made you feel anything real. Melissa nodded, quietly. But I also remember the year you organized the winter formal. Do you recall what happened with the fundraiser? The room seemed to pause again, just for a moment. Melissa didn't answer. I'll help you, Mrs. Porter said softly. The student council raised $1,200. But when we opened the lockbox 2 days before the dance, half of it was missing. One of Melissa's friends shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You said it was Jennifer Collins, Mrs. Porter went on. You cried, swore up and down she was the one who took the money. The school nearly expelled her. Melissa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't believe you, Evelyn said, but I couldn't prove it. Until now, I suppose. There it was, the missing piece. The final ingredient. Because this wasn't about one dinner, one lie, one night. This was a pattern. A person so wrapped in performance, in manipulation, in soft-spoken deceit, that she'd been rehearsing it for years. Melissa looked down, her hands clutching her coat like armor. Mrs. Porter didn't scold her. She didn't raise her voice. She simply sighed and looked at me. She always wanted attention, she said, even if it came at someone else's expense. Then she turned to leave, but not before gently patting Melissa's shoulder, almost like a benediction. Almost like saying, you're not beyond redemption, but you are not invisible anymore. As the door closed behind her, silence settled once more. Melissa stood motionless. No one said a word. Not her friends, not me. She gathered the last of her things, lowered her eyes, and left without another sound. But I watched her go slower than before. Shoulders hunched, heels no longer clicking with authority, just echoing faintly like a memory disappearing into the night. Some truths come in fire, others come like snow, and some arrive dressed in wool, with pearl earrings, and the memory of a lie never forgotten. But that wasn't the end of Melissa's story, because 2 days later, she came back, and she didn't come alone. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind that drifts by slowly, like steam from a fresh cup of coffee. The lunch crowd had thinned, and the kitchen was winding down. I was in the back office, going over invoices, listening to an old Willie Nelson record on low volume, when Mia, our hostess, knocked gently on the door. Tom, she whispered, there's a man out front asking to speak with the owner. Says, it's personal. I raised an eyebrow. She leaned in closer. Melissa's with him. I stood slowly. A strange stillness settled in my chest. Less like anticipation, more like the feeling you get right before a storm breaks. I made my way through the dining room, wiping my hands on my apron as I stepped into the front foyer. He stood there in a crisp navy suit, tie knotted sharp, shoes shined to a mirror finish. In his left hand, a worn leather briefcase. In his right, clenched too tight, was a pair of sunglasses, though the sky outside was overcast. He looked like a man used to boardrooms, not bakeries. Confidence wrapped in tailored fabric. And beside him, Melissa. She wasn't wearing red. This time, no heels, no makeup, just jeans, a sweatshirt, and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Real fear. Are you Thomas Romano? The man asked. I nodded. I am. He extended a hand. Daniel Hampton. I'm Melissa's father. We sat in my office, the three of us. Melissa didn't speak. She sat with her head down, hands folded in her lap like a child in the principal's office. Mr. Hampton. Daniel cleared his throat, pulled out a folded printout of the receipt, the same one I'd given her. Highlighted, annotated lines circled in red. I'd like to dispute this, he said carefully. I think there's been some kind of mistake. I didn't respond right away. I reached under the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small USB drive. Then I turned toward the computer, brought up the security footage from that night, and pressed play. For the next 10 minutes, the office filled with their voices from 2 nights prior. Every order, every lie, every toast. Crystal clear, thanks to the audio we installed near the VIP section, something we'd done years ago after a kitchen fire incident that turned into a legal mess. Daniel Hampton leaned forward as the footage rolled. Melissa shifted in her seat. When the recording hit the part where she claimed to know the owner, he blinked once slow, like he was trying to unhear it. When she claimed to have arranged the reservation personally with Tony, he sighed through his nose. And when her friend asked if I ever felt like my life was pathetic for being a waiter, he looked down, closed his eyes, and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. By the time the recording ended, there was no room left for debate. The lies weren't just spoken, they were documented, framed, and replayed. And the man who had walked in with a lawyer's posture, now looked more like a father, watching his child become a stranger. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. Melissa didn't move. He turned to her, voice lower, but firm. "This is who you are now. This is what you do." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. His jaw clenched. "Do you have any idea what it means to earn something? What it means to build a name and protect it?" Her eyes welled up, but he didn't let her look away. "This man," he continued, pointing at me, "comes from legacy, from sweat, from dignity. And you tried to tear that down for what? A photo, a moment of attention." Melissa reached for her purse, but he stopped her. "No," he said. Then he turned back to me. "I can't erase what she did, but I can try to honor the place she disrespected." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook. Yes, an actual checkbook, hand wrote out a sum. Not the exact bill. More than. He paused, looked me in the eye, and wrote a little more. He tore it off, folded it carefully, and handed it to me. "For the meal," he said, "and the lesson." I didn't look at the number. I just nodded. He stood, looked at Melissa one last time, and said, "Let's go." She rose silently, and they left. And just like that, the door closed behind them. I sat there for a moment, the check still in my hand, the silence thick as flour. In all my years running this restaurant, I've seen a lot. Fights over reservations, proposals gone wrong, first dates, last dinners, reunions, regrets. But I had never seen something quite like this. Because sometimes the loudest shame doesn't come from getting caught. It comes from being unrecognizable to the one person who raised you. I didn't frame the check, but I kept it. Not for the money, for the weight it carried, and for what was still to come. I didn't see Melissa again for almost 3 weeks. Winter had softened into early spring, by then less frost, more thaw. The kind of weather that makes people brave enough to shed coats, even if the air still carries a bite. Business had picked up again, and most of the staff had already tucked the Melissa night away, like a strange dream best left in the drawer. But I hadn't forgotten. Some stories don't fade, they settle. It was a quiet Tuesday when she came back. No entourage this time. No red coat, no clacking heels, no pretend phone calls. She walked in just after lunch, standing at the entrance like a traveler, unsure if she was welcome. The same girl, but quieter, smaller, as if something inside her had been folded in half. I looked up from the bar, caught her eye. She didn't wave, just waited. I walked over, drying my hands on a towel. "Can I help you?" She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small manila envelope. Not dramatic, just deliberate. Inside was a handwritten letter. No name on the outside, no perfume, no tricks. "I don't expect anything," she said, "but I thought maybe you should read it." I took it and nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words, so she turned and left, just like that. I waited until the restaurant emptied out before I opened the envelope. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, written in careful, looping cursive, that betrayed how much she'd edited herself. She admitted she'd lied, that she'd faked the messages, that she never knew the owner, never had a reservation, never even been to the restaurant before that night. She wrote that she was used to pretending, used to spinning stories, just to feel important for a little. Well, that she had spent so long performing for approval, she forgot how to just be a person. But what stood out wasn't the apology. It was the line near the end. "You didn't humiliate me that night." You held up a mirror, and I saw myself for the first time in years. She ended with a question. "I don't know if you can forgive someone like me, but I'm asking anyway." I sat with that letter for a long while. Forgiveness is a strange thing. People think it's a transaction, something you hand over, clean and complete, like change across a counter. But it isn't. It's a process. A decision you make over and over again. And some days, you don't feel like making it. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth it. I didn't write her back. But the next day, I told Mia at the host stand, if a woman named Melissa ever calls for a reservation, give her one. No VIP table, I added. Just a regular seat. Same as everybody else. Because forgiveness isn't about making someone feel good. It's about choosing to be better than the thing that hurt you. And in a world so full of noise, bitterness, and ego, maybe the boldest thing any of us can do is be kind intentionally, quietly, and with boundaries. Melissa never came back to dine. Not officially. But a few months later, I heard from a vendor that she'd taken a job at a non-profit in Louisville, helping young women navigate college and career decisions. Apparently, she talks less now, listens more, doesn't interrupt when someone else is speaking. I don't know if that's redemption. I don't know if people ever really change overnight. But I know this: when you serve someone truth instead of ego, boundaries instead of revenge, you give them something that might just last longer than shame. You give them a chance. And sometimes, that's enough. But as for me, I wasn't thinking about redemption. I was thinking about my grandfather. Because just a few days later, something would happen that would take me right back to where it all began. Before the red coat, before the lies, before the restaurant even had walls. A letter from the past. A secret I never saw coming. And one final moment that would change the way I saw legacy forever. It was a Thursday morning when the letter arrived. No return address. Just my name to Romano typed neatly on the front of a yellowing envelope that looked like it had sat in a drawer for decades. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another forgotten invoice or a delayed holiday card. But something about the weight of it, the way it felt in my hand, made me stop. Inside was a single page. Folded once, crisped and quiet. The handwriting was careful, familiar. It was from my grandfather. Dated July 3rd, 1983, the year I was born. My heart caught in my throat. As I sat at the back table near the kitchen, the same one where he used to peel garlic by the dozen while humming old Sinatra tunes, the morning sun stretched through the window, lighting the page like it knew this moment mattered. To my grandson, Thomas, if you're reading this, it means the restaurant is still standing. That alone makes me smile. I read the rest slowly. He wrote about the first time he saw the empty lot that would become Romano's Just Dirt and Weeds and Hope. About how he worked 3 jobs and saved every dime. And how he poured the first foundation with his own hands. Because no contractor would trust an immigrant with a big dream and a small budget. We didn't have much, he wrote, but we had food. We had faith. And we had each other. That's enough to feed a community, if you do it with heart. He didn't write like a poet. His sentences were plain, but every word felt like it had been simmering for hours. Like the sauce he used to cook on Sundays, low, slow, and full of stories. At the end of the letter, he wrote this: you don't need to be loud to lead. You don't need to be rich to matter. Just stay at the table. Serve with love. Protect the name. That's the legacy. That's the real recipe. I sat there long after I finished reading. The staff moved quietly around me, sensing the weight in the air. Mia brought me a coffee without asking. I think she saw the tears in my eyes and chose to pretend she didn't. A kindness I'll never forget. That night, after closing, I stayed behind. The restaurant was still and warm, smelling of roasted garlic and old wood. I walked over to the office, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out the receipt. The one from Melissa's night. $4,198 double stacks, and tip included. I placed it beside the letter. 2 pieces of paper, one holding a debt, the other, a legacy. I had framed the receipt once. A symbol of justice. Of a night when the truth cut through the noise. But now, it felt incomplete. Because legacy isn't just about what you protect. It's also about what you let go. I took the receipt out of the frame, replaced it with the letter, and I hung it above my desk, just beneath a black and white photo of my grandfather in his apron, smiling with a ladle in one hand and a cigar in the other. People come and go. Some lie. Some steal. Some forget their manners, their humility, even their decency. But others bring letters, bring stories, bring silence and forgiveness, and moments that remind you why you stayed. And through it all, the walls hold memory. The chairs hold laughter. The table holds truth. I still clear tables, still mop the floor some nights when the dishwasher's out sick. I shake hands, pour coffee, remember names. Not because I have to, because I get to. Because Romano's isn't just a restaurant. It's a place where a man in a red apron once fed strangers like family. Where a girl once lied and learned. Where a legacy was passed. Not in fortune, but in the quiet act of staying. So I stay. And if you ever find yourself passing through, craving something simple and warm, something that feels like home, you'll find me here, still at the table, just like he asked.